Hello and welcome to TVB News. Hong Kong households will have to pay a lot more electricity next year. The rates of increase proposed by the two power companies, Hong Kong Electric and CLP Power, are 45.6% and 19.8% respectively. Christy Khan has more.
Citing fluctuating global energy prices as a result of the Russia-Ukraine war, the city's power companies announced a rise in electricity tariffs next year. Executives from the two companies today presented the proposals to lawmakers. CLP said they will keep their basic tariff unchanged, while the fuel charge will go up to 62 cents per unit of electricity. This means the bill will be 6.4% higher compared with the current price. Hong Kong Electric will raise its basic tariff to 114.5 cents per unit, with its fuel charge rising to 82.5 cents per unit. That means a 5.5% increase compared with this month's price.
The power companies earlier said a tariff hike will be inevitable due to soaring international fuel prices. But relief measures are also introduced to alleviate the financial burden of some particular groups of people.
動用大約2億港元。
The Community Energy Saving Fund will be spending $200 million to take forward some of the programs. $100 million will be spent on subsidizing 150,000 households, including the subdivided units, to subsidize their tariff cost and to ease their burden.
Separately, Hong Kong Electric said it will offer catering coupons to grassroots families and tariff subsidy to subdivided households. Some residents criticized the increment in electricity tariffs as being too much.
You cannot only just for yourself and also your shareholders. Even the shareholder has to speak up because you have to pay back. Ridiculous, unreasonable.
The government said it is actively playing a gatekeeping role to safeguard public interest in this matter.
After receiving the tariff proposal, we have started negotiation with the two power companies with a view to keeping the tariff increase to the lowest level and minimizing the impact on the consumers.
The environment chief said the increasing level has already been kept to a minimum. Christy Khan, TVB News.
6 former executives of Apple Daily pleaded guilty to conspiring to collude with a foreign country or foreign elements to endanger national security. The court adjourned their sentencing until after the trial of Jimmy Lai, the founder of the now defunct newspaper. Sharon Tang reports.
The defendants were taken to the High Court in 2 correctional services vehicles this morning. Security was beefed out outside the courthouse. A 3-judge panel composed of designated national security judges presided over the hearing. The defendants are former Next Digital CEO Chen Kim-hong, former Apple Daily associate publisher Chen Pui-man, former chief editor Ryan Law, former executive chief editor Lam Man-chung, former chief editor of the paper's English section Feng Wai-kong, and former editorial writer Yung Chen-ki. They all pleaded guilty to the charges. Prosecutors referred to some 160 articles published on Apple Daily to prove that the defendants had taken part in the writing or authorizing the publishing of the articles as an illegal propaganda between April 2019 and June 2021. During that period, the paper printed 78 million copies. It also introduced member subscription in 2019, which drew 3 million registrations by September the same year. The court heard that Chung, Chan and Law met every day to decide on publishing contents. Feng, apart from being the paper's English section editor, also wrote commentaries under a pseudonym. All defendants agreed with the prosecution's allegation that Next Digital founder Jimmy Lai had been promoting his political stance using Apple Daily since the Occupy Central movement in 2014. After the government proposed an amendment to the extradition bill in 2019, Lai also published seditious articles targeting the SAR and Beijing, calling on the public to take part in protests. As the social unrest continued into June that year, Apple Daily published at least 34 articles about subverting the state rule and insinuating people's hatred towards the police. After the Hong Kong national security law came into effect, the paper asked foreign countries to sanction the central government. Judge Esther Tor found the 6 defendants guilty. Prosecutors requested the judge carry out sentencing after Jimmy Lai's trial, which begins on December 1st. The court also heard that Chen Kim-hung will testify in Lai's trial as a tainted witness. The judges agreed that Lai's case will have an impact on the current case. The court has also asked the defense counsels to submit mitigation pleas and agreed to deal with the sentencing after the trial of Jimmy Lai. Sharon Tang, TVB News.
Meanwhile, another defendant involved in the same case, Jimmy Lai, pleaded not guilty to his charge. Prosecutors said in court that Lai was the mastermind behind seeking help from the U.S. to sanction Hong Kong and the central government. The court heard that Lai, as the founder of Apple Daily, was in charge of hosting the so-called lunchbox meetings to talk about the paper's editorial directions. Before the Hong Kong national security law took effect, Lai had sought international sanctions against Beijing and the SAR, including meeting the then U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo in 2019. In October 2019, he also called on the U.S. to support Hong Kong protests. Lai wants to hire a Queen's Counsel from the UK to defend his case, but the Justice Secretary has appealed directly to the Court of Final Appeal to oppose the arrangement. Overseas, Malaysia's king today asked for an audience with the two contenders for prime minister and may possibly choose one of them after neither of their parties were able to achieve a parliamentary majority. After Saturday's general election resulted in a hung parliament, the Alliance of Hope's Anwar Ibrahim and the National Alliance's Muhyiddin Yassin were trying to win over rival parties to reach the required 112 parliamentary seats to form a government. However, the incumbent National Front Party, whose 30 seats were crucial to both contenders, said today it would not support either of the two leading parties. That forced the country's king, Al-Sultan Abdullah, to announce today that he would pick the next prime minister, though he did not put a timeline on his decision. Welcome back. The United Nations nuclear watchdog said a potential nuclear disaster was averted over the weekend after dozens of explosions at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Ukraine and Russia blame each other for shelling the Russian-controlled plant, as well as nearby villages in the region. An IAEA team said they found widespread damage at the site, but the plant's essential systems were still intact. Nazvi Karim has more.
Residents in the village of Komishuvaka in the Zaporizhzhia region are clearing away rubble of what used to be their house. They say it was Russian shells that caused the damage, with dozens of explosions being reported at villages like this, as well as the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. As expected, Ukraine and Russia are trading blame for attacks on the Zaporizhzhia power plant. The UN's nuclear watchdog, the IAEA, said Ukraine narrowly escaped a disaster over the weekend after a barrage of shells fell near reactors and damaged a radioactive waste storage building. Alexei Likachov, head of Russia's state nuclear corporation Rosatom, said the station was at risk of a nuclear accident. He hid out at Kiev, saying it appears Ukraine considers a small nuclear incident acceptable and called for a halt to the shelling. Ukraine, meanwhile, is trying to evacuate civilians from the Kherson and Mykolaiv regions over a lack of heat, electricity and water amid Russia's continued shelling of key infrastructure. With the country's brutal winter already arriving in some parts, more than 10 million Ukrainians are without power. Ukraine wants people to move to safer central and western parts of the country, where there is reportedly less damage to power and water supplies. Kyiv said they would provide transport, accommodation and medical care. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said last week that Russia's continued bombardment was because of Kyiv's refusal to negotiate. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has a different view. On Monday, he called on NATO nations and allies to recognize Russia as a terrorist state because of Moscow's shelling of the country's energy supplies. Speaking to NATO's 68th Parliamentary Assembly, he urged stricter sanctions on Russia and appealed for more air defense aid to Ukraine. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg appears eager to fulfill Zelensky's wish, saying it would strengthen Kyiv's hand at the negotiating table.
We need to realize that this war most likely will end at some stage at the negotiating table. But we also know that the outcome of those negotiations are totally dependent on the strength on the battlefield.
Nazri Karim, TVB News.
The Chinese and U.S. defense ministers today held their second face-to-face talks this year. The meeting between China's Wei Fenghe and Lloyd Austin of the United States took place on the sidelines of the ASEAN Defense Ministers Summit in Cambodia. It comes amid increased tensions over Taiwan and Beijing's increased military activity in the region. During the roughly 90-minute meeting, Austin emphasized the need to improve crisis communications while raising concern about what he called increasingly dangerous behavior by Chinese military aircraft. The meeting comes a week after President Xi Jinping met U.S. President Joe Biden during the Group of 20 summit in Indonesia. It was the second meeting between Wei and Austin after their talks in Singapore in June, but the first since a visit to Taiwan in August by U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi that enraged Beijing. Hong Kong reported 7,139 COVID cases Tuesday, 6,500 of which are locally acquired. Cases were found in 18 hostels for the elderly and the disabled, with 28 residents and staff infected. Around 1,500 infections were discovered in 741 schools. 27 schools have suspended some of their classes. Authorities found that at least 12 cases involved the XBB variant, while 6 cases involved the BQ.1.1 mutant strain. 13 more people have died from the virus. So far, 10,410 people have died from COVID during the 5th wave. And the MTR's new 8-car train will commence service on the Kwun Tong line Sunday. The project, costing MTR $6 billion, is dubbed as the Q train, which was made on the mainland. It will replace the 40-year-old British Metro Camel model. The rail operator said passengers will be able to experience 6 upgrades, including LED lighting and new handrails. Hong Kong has slipped 4 places in the World Justice Project Rule of Law Index this year. Secretary for Justice Paul Lam, speaking on a TVB program, blamed misperceptions about the city for its fall from the top 20. He said the government is working to rectify the situation, adding that Hong Kong still ranks higher than the United States. Sharon Tang reports.
In a recent rule of law ranking by the World Justice Project, Hong Kong has slipped 4 places to number 22 out of 140 jurisdictions. Speaking on TVB's Straight Talk program, Secretary for Justice Paul Lam said it is because of inaccurate perceptions about the city's situation.
Hong Kong ranked 22, which is still a very high place in the overall survey. And the drop of 3 places, you have to look into the reasons. And apparently, that's because of some incorrect perception about the human rights situation in Hong Kong. But anyway, once again, you have to look at how we compare to other jurisdictions. For example, United States. We've always been very critical of Hong Kong. If I remember correctly, USA ranked 26, which is 4 places below Hong Kong.
Lam said the government has been working to rectify the misconceptions.
Some foreign politicians and foreign mass media, they publish statements which are quite misleading, and sometimes they are utterly false in relation to the legal system and the judicial system. And I think our main duty is to correct those false statements.
Lam said there are plans to counter the effects of misinformation, including the setting up of a steering committee on rule of law education to better inform members of the public. Under the 14th five-year plan of the country, Hong Kong will develop into an international legal service and dispute resolution center. Lam said an important recent development is that Beijing has decided to set up a preparatory office for the establishment of an international court of conciliation in Hong Kong.
It's quite unprecedented because it's the first time that the central authority has agreed to allow Hong Kong to become so to speak, the headquarters of an international organization. And mediation, of course, is one of the major means of dispute resolution. It's getting more and more popular.
Sharon Tang, TVB News.
The White House got into the holiday season with the annual pardoning of a Thanksgiving turkey. U.S. President Joe Biden played his part in the 75-year-old tradition of issuing a pardon to keep 2 turkeys off the menu. The 2 birds, known as Chocolate and Chip, each weighing around 50 pounds, were from North Carolina. They will now get to live out the rest of their lives on the campus of North Carolina State University. The holiday mood on the White House lawn, South Lawn, was upbeat as the Democrats have performed better than expected in midterm elections. That's the news. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.